Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. I know it is that snoozy time just after lunch, so we'll dive straight into this. We've got a great panel here. They're very varied as well, within different sectors within the industry, obviously. So hopefully there's something on the panel that appeals to everybody in the room. We do, at the moment, live in a world where margins are getting squeezed. As you heard earlier with Ben speaking, guest experience of what's going on in restaurants is going up. They want more and more from the projects that you're building. And then we all have shareholders and we all have to answer to someone, and they want costs to go lower and lower and lower. So that's what we're going to be talking a little bit today. So we'll open it up with, in your chosen sector, what's been the biggest influence that you've seen over the years?
Go first?
Yeah, sure, let's lead the way.
So over the years, I think the one most immediately is the one we've been talking about, and that's the impact of digital and how guests are using mobile apps and third-party delivery is affecting the physical restaurant.
Yes. We're not in the restaurant business, but our big part of our business is food and food preparation and service. And again, like, we are probably behind the curve maybe a little bit because we're not a true restaurant, but digital technology, like kiosk ordering, everybody wants to do it and no one really knows how and what would make it work in a grocery store situation.
Yeah, I think you can't argue with that. And before I start, I'm losing my voice, so apologies. This really hot, raspy voice is not intentional. Hopefully y'all can still hear me. I think that the biggest shift is that we're really changing. 10 years ago, we all were really consumed with restaurant design, and you can't live in that space anymore. It's very much about experience design. And I know it's like, at this stage in the convention, these are things that we've heard over and over again, but it's true. If any brand or design team is just focusing on restaurant design, they're missing the bigger picture, and they're missing the bigger opportunities. So I think that's certainly the biggest change.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I mean, let's stick with you just for now, because we've obviously heard a lot about pizzas.
And you'll hear more.
Yeah, and then we can come back and your voice will be gone. So, how have you managed from a cost perspective these new changes coming in, and as well as with your food as well? Obviously, people's diets are changing. How have you managed the cost and the guest expectations with those?
Well, I think that the biggest thing you need to do, there's two keys to providing a great guest experience and doing it in a way that is still profitable. And the first one is focusing on the aspects of the experience that the guests actually care about. And before joining Blaze, I was with McDonald's Corporation for about 10 years, and we were famous for these really elaborate ceiling structures, beautiful things. We spent ungodly amounts of money on them, and nobody, you take an informal poll of any consumer, and they would say, well, pull them out of the restaurant, what was up there? Well, I have no idea. So, that's a loss of revenue and focus right there. So, I think the first thing is spending the money where it makes the most sense. A very typical approach to cutting cost is everything takes a haircut 10% across the board. We're going to get a chair that's 10% cheaper. We're going to get a light fixture that's 10% cheaper. We're going to get ceilings that are 10% cheaper. And what you end up doing is creating this experience that's 10% worse. Not more impactful. What you might end up doing is spending more money on a better chair or things, a more expensive tabletop, whatever touches the food where customers are actually interfacing, the things people touch, and spend, ruthlessly cutting on everything else. That way you're really impacting things that people care about. I think the other side of that too, though, is you have to change the way you think about procurement and buying. And I don't think that we can be successful in what we're doing if we're not like this with our supply chain folks. We have to think very differently about our volume, and if we have a brand that has perceived volume or actual volume, it doesn't matter. And how do we go about spending in ways that really are a bit smarter, but maybe you're buying the same stuff too.
Mm. How are you seeing, especially with Whole Foods, because obviously people are now using supermarkets very differently to how they used to. How have you guys adapted to meet the demands of these?
I think one thing that Whole Foods has really done a fantastic job is sticking with our core values and how we evoke that certain experience in our stores. And So when you were asking about like health and dietary restrictions or emphasizing different diets, I think that's one thing that we've done really well, and we need to continue to capitalize on that portion of the business. One thing that we are doing, cutting costs, is what does the customer see and touch, and what makes a difference. And I've always been the advocate for sometimes less is more, and I'm not saying like less stuff, but less distractions. We have such a big story to tell at Whole Foods. Our suppliers, our deep connection to healthy eating and healthy eating education. And we tend to be very verbose about that in stores, and like, no one's going to read any of it, and I've been saying that for years. And so we've tried to be strategic on what messages that we're actually telling, and that it be consistent throughout the company, and it's very aligned with what we believe in. So, that way you can take that money and put it somewhere else, but definitely anything that is customer touch and feel, interaction with the customer is one thing that we want to make sure we are very smart about. And back of house, like, do we need to tile the team member restrooms? Should they just be FRP? Like little things like that can make a big difference.
And do you find, obviously, you're a much bigger, different scales of building, but also in company-wise, do you find that that's an advantage to you guys, especially from a buying perspective and a
Yes,
delivery?
we are doing more consolidated purchasing for all of our equipment, and a lot of our maintenance contracts are going to a globalized function, which, you can believe it, wasn't happening before. Then there's sort of the unknowns when you go into a city or a county where, because we are Whole Foods and we're owned by Amazon, there's a lot more eyes on us, and so we end up getting a lot of critiques on our plans and a lot of feedback, and so that oftentimes is adding to the cost of our project. So we need to be doing our due diligence up front and talking to cities and inspectors and all of that up front, and it does help.
It's interesting. And with Chick-Fil-A, obviously, you're virtually at the top of the game. Everyone's chasing you. How do you guys stay ahead? How far ahead are you planning for the future?
So far ahead, we have teams that are focused way out in the future, but I would say the most of our efforts are focused in like the next 5 years. And so really making sure that we're staying with our guest and with our customer, not burdening our team members, and keeping up with technology too, because you can't get ahead of technology. Sometimes you can innovate so far past that your technology is way out of sync.
That's interesting about technology. How have you seen technology affect not just your guests, but also your staffing? And I kind of will go down, because I know at the very end there, we spoke about it on the phone, and that's kind of an interesting story about how it's changing your staff. So obviously you have kiosks everywhere. How's that affecting the drive-through as well?
So we don't have kiosks in our restaurant. We do something that's called upstream ordering, which is where a team member will order with the guest using an iPad and rotate with them through the queue. Mm-hmm. So we often use technology as an enhancement to the human.
And how's technology affecting you as a large store?
Well, we have our parent company, Amazon, who is very technologically focused. And so I think in the next few years, we'll be seeing more and more of that. Those things are very withheld from the general Whole Foods team members, but I definitely see that happening more and more. You see Amazon Prime now in our stores, and that's been a huge advantage to our sales growth. It's crazy. So it's changing a lot of how we operate as a brand.
Amazing. And with Blaze, how's it affecting you guys?
Well, I think that Mandy hit on this really well in the last session, so I'll just add a little bit to that. We really try to think of technology in the service of the guest, and you shouldn't go into a space and be met with this gauntlet of kiosks or this gauntlet of screens everywhere. I think it's always a bit of a fight, because for operational efficiency, you do need a lot of those screens. We talked about the KDS that we're going to be implementing at some point soon. Whether it's kiosks, whether it's app, there's there's screens everywhere, digital menu boards. And how do you keep that from really dehumanizing the experience? So I think we're spending a lot of focus on the balance of not having that be the very first thing you have when you walk into the space. Because the thing is, as our delivery and carryout business is increasing, it's really important that maybe it's just 2 minutes that somebody's going into the restaurant to pick up their order and leave for carryout. It has to be an impactful experience. they don't need to sit there and enjoy the pizza to have that memory imprint of this is what I'm buying, this is what it means to purchase from Blaze specifically and not, from another avenue or channel. And, we can't miss that opportunity by hitting them with things that are convenient for us and maybe annoying for our customers.
Yeah, I would add to that is one of the things one of our old CEO, Walter Robb, said is our team members are our special sauce. And sorry, McDonald's, but that's that really tells the story, I think, of customer and employee interactions is what makes that special. And again, I don't know what the balance is between technology and screens and ordering and having a real live customer experience.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. How do you, especially with Chick-Fil-A, how do you balance the need for convenience, so in an airport location versus somewhere like a standalone where people are going to dwell longer? How does that kind of affect how you use technology, but also how the store is set up? Does it change the kitchens much?
I'm not sure I follow your question.
So obviously, so we have you have a large store where, we went to downtown, there's lots of flashing lights, people want to take Instagram pictures of it, versus, say, somewhere where I just need my food and get out. How does that affect the positioning and the cost that you spend on a store? So is it obviously cheaper for you guys to go into an airport location and be less, but you have the food coming out quicker, versus maybe a standalone store where you'll invest more money in it?
That's interesting because the speed of the food is the same regardless of the location.
There you go.
Right? And the investment is the same as well. So obviously an airport doesn't cost the same as a freestanding restaurant, but I guess what I'm saying is that evenly we approach it the same no matter what, and that is focused on the quality of the food and the quality of the experience.
That's interesting. Just with technology a little bit, we were talking a few weeks ago, we were talking about how technology, obviously rising wages, everyone's very conscious of it. You spoke a little bit about, with Blaze, about your initiatives where more technology is coming in and staff have been reduced, but you're putting them forward from back of house to front of house. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Right, well, and I think that's not something specific to Blaze. I think that probably a lot of other restaurants are seeing this as well, where you're taking these aspects of the food prep process that really can be automated easily and don't, the human, if you will, isn't adding a lot of value to the process. You're streamlining that aspect of things so that you can have trade what you would have in labor for hospitality. And I think it's a bit of a myth to think that that's a labor savings, because that's really a more skilled position. It's a more fulfilling position. I think people like to talk to each other. You'd much rather, interact with somebody else than, say, input an order into a POS or a kiosk or whatever it is. So I think that we're seeing that it's a shift in labor and less of a savings for technology. But I think to answer your question about how does the kitchen change, I mean, we have a different experience. Our engine does shift substantially if we have a drive-through business. It changes a bit for airports even, where we don't have the space to do some of the other things. So I mean, I think that's kind of the interesting part of having such a variety on this panel. For us, it's a very opposite experience.
And how is the delivery model? Obviously, Uber Eats, all of these things is now exploding. If you haven't heard of it, then you're under a rock somewhere. How's that affected you guys? Does it affect you much with Whole Foods at all? Nothing coming in for you?
No.
But I imagine it affects both yourselves in a big way. How's that affecting also your sales, but also the bricks and mortar stores? Are you having to adapt for it?
Yes. Yeah, it's a whole different channel of our customer that's coming into the restaurant. And so being able to service that DoorDasher in a way that honors them and gets them on their way so that ultimately they honor our guest at the other end of that delivery that they're at, but actually getting them in and out. And that's the thing that they tell us the most is we need to get in and out fast. Right now, the best way for them to come into our restaurants to pick up is actually to come into our restaurants. And so for us, the challenge is can we figure out how to get them through our parking lot and back out with that order and not ever get out of their car. And that is our challenge that we're working with right now.
And how's it affecting you guys with Blaze?
I think in some ways, everybody does have that same issue of how do you increase speed. We can talk about how do you make your kitchen laid out in such a way that, we're used to designing a kitchen that moves food in one direction towards the dining room, how do you do something where we traditionally wouldn't have a drive-through window that directs it also out the window without adding all these steps? I think the more interesting aspect of of the whole discussion, though, is, anybody in this room that also does retail and not just restaurants, for years, we've been, like 10 years, it seems, we've been talking about the upcoming retail apocalypse. And, brick and mortar is dying. Every conference you go to, half of the sessions were brick and mortar is dying. How are we going to resuscitate retail? How are we going to bring it back? And you got to laugh a little bit because retail is not dying, it's evolving. And the same thing is happening right now with restaurants. And, it's fun to talk about ghost kitchens and mobile kitchens and all these other things. But I think it's a bit of a mistake to think that the whole business is going in that direction at the complete peril of the other side of it. So, for an example, I had our oven manufacturer, the CEO of the company that makes our ovens, arguably the most important part of our kitchen, came in the other week, and he was just like all flustered because he read some article that the restaurant of 2030 said that food theater is dead. And of course, it's like a $50,000 oven, and it's designed to look exciting and have all of these flames and, get people all whipped into a frenzy. And he was having a fit because he's like, theater's dead, my business is dead. And, I think I appreciate his concern with that, but I think that what's happening now in the industry is just amplifying the experiential end of it even more. You have to have a much better, much sharper in-restaurant experience because, people, when I'm dating myself by saying this, but when mobile phones came out back in the day and everyone said, oh, everybody's antisocial, they're on their phones all the time. They're not antisocial at all. They're talking to each other in a different way. Same thing is happening with the restaurant industry. People still are dying for exciting experiences and for connection, and it's up to us to provide that and to spend just as much effort on doing that as we are with accommodating the other ways that they want to get the food from us.
Yeah. So how is a different model, obviously, Whole Foods? How are you approaching from an F&B experience for your guests and users?
Experience has been like number one, at least in my book, for shopping at Whole Foods, right? So it's always an adventure and an exploration, and that's why the majority of stores start when you walk into produce, and there's like colorful fruits and vegetables, and we want to evoke many of our values, right? Freshness, health, environment, et cetera, et cetera. So, that I never want that to change, but I do think there's some efficiencies on certain parts of the store that we could be more efficient with more technology-based or not as experiential, right? So we're working on some self-serve concepts. We've done a lot of changing the way that our products are displayed so that they're more like you go in, you take what you want instead of asking a team member to put it in a box for you and wrap it up and give it to you, right? So, but you do need to be selective of what that looks like. I think, retail isn't dead; it's changing, and I think there's lots of opportunities for companies like Whole Foods and these guys up here to like tweak what the experience is, especially on the one-on-one interactions with a customer and a team member or employee.
That's interesting. Now, there's a lot of fads that fly around, obviously. Things come and go. Plant-based foods, is it going to come into your menus anytime? Are you seeing it's going to affect you? Is it something that you see is going to hang around or disappear? What's your opinions on it?
Well, I'll tell you, number one, like plant-based foods is not going anywhere. It's sort of like the wild, wild west of natural foods these days. Like people have been eating this way for decades. I'm not saying like I'm a total health freak, but there's been options like this for a long time. And so I want to kind of, it's like cannabis, right? It's like this new fancy thing that's happening. And so everyone's getting on it. And plant-based foods is great, and the Impossible Burger, like that's a great alternative. Like, would I want to ever eat that on a daily basis? No, it's not very healthy, but it doesn't have meat in it. So I think it's like the lunch we had, all the vegetarian options that people had on my table were fantastic, right? So I think there's a lot of variety, and there's a bigger picture in the world that we have to think about by choosing plant-based foods.
Do you think it's going to start creating into pizzas as well, into your area?
Well, it already has. So this actually doesn't affect us as much. You know, we have a 100% clean ingredient list. We have vegan chorizo on the menu. We've got vegan cheese. We've got all kinds of things. So I don't think this is new. And plus half, you know, 3/4 of what you put on a pizza is a vegetable anyway. For us, you know, we spend a lot of time innovating from a menu perspective. So when we were going through everything, you know, a few years ago, nitrate-free pepperoni did not exist in the marketplace. And you can't run a pizza joint without offering pepperoni. You can't say you have a clean menu without having a nitrate-free product. So our chef, and this is, I think, for me, one of the exciting things about being with Blaze, our chef worked with a food production house to develop this nitrate-free pepperoni, which is out in the marketplace today. So I think that's nothing new for us as a brand because that's really one of the pillars of who we are. I think in the larger scheme of things, though, we're probably going to see less of a trend of vegetables masquerading as other foods like burgers and maybe just better prepared vegetables, which taste, you know, as a meat eater, I can't really weigh in on that, but I think they taste better, you know, in other forms. But.
And with other technology coming in, obviously we're talking about driverless cars and all of these kind of things. How do you approach some of these kind of technologies that are so far in the future, or is it not at the moment? Can you only plan for maybe 2 years ahead, or are you trying to start integrating some of these now, especially with delivery?
Yeah. So I think it's a little bit of what I mentioned before. It's like we have to get all of those restaurants up and ready for delivery, right? And really have your eye on the future to make sure that if it is going to be a drone, if it is going to be a driverless car, that whatever that is can begin to work with those investments that we're making right now. And we would be making sort of a long-term bet, right? So it's just keeping an eye on the future and making sure you're ready for tomorrow.
It's interesting.
I totally agree with Gwen on that, and I think also finding the sweet spot between you can't totally future-proof everything, and if you do, it's going to take you too long to do it, and that's a huge gap that I think a lot of brands, especially larger brands, they want to fully vet something, they want to look, you know, play out all 20 scenarios that could happen, and then they never do it, and then everybody else does it, and then they're chasing them, so it's an interesting balancing act.
Yeah, I imagine. But to start at the other end of Blaze, how does social media play a factor in you as a brand?
Oh, it's a big part of who we are. So LeBron James was one of our initial investors, and he doesn't own any restaurants, but he's a really great spokesman for us. I think that any brand really lives and dies on customer opinion. And you know, you can have somebody in a restaurant today tell everybody under the sun how great or terrible you are like that. We're lucky in that we have a lot of rabid fans who tell us quickly that they're mad that the keto crust is gone, things like that. But it's a big part of who we are. I think from a design standpoint, we also are careful to not necessarily craft these, I don't know, contrived environments that, you know, are ready for the Instagrammable moments. I think we've had some interesting discussions in other panels today about trends. And trends are great, but you can't build an experience around trends. I think you can build experience around great food and hospitality and things that are a little bit more timeless and, you know, surprise people with how good the experience was and do that instead of just, you know, let's make something that looks great on Instagram for about a month and then what do you do? And you have to renovate a month later because it's really boring because everybody's seen it.
Yeah, really remarkable experiences that get retweeted are actually maybe some of the best ways, right? That happen from the environments that are created by teams like ours, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we talk about Instagrammable moments, and you're right. I mean, how do we avoid falling into that trap of chasing that from a bricks and mortar perspective?
It just feels so insincere. I think that's what happens. Like when it happens naturally, you know, we've partnered with some street artists. We've got a couple of things on the horizon where we'll be doing that. And, you know, like that, if somebody by chance happens to think, oh, this Blaze and, you know, wherever it is great and I want to take a picture, that's awesome. But I think that people can sense when you are fabricating an Instagram moment. And a lot of people are, and you know, I'm sure we have in the past. I'm not trying to throw shade at anybody else around here, but people feel it, they sense it, and they do not respond well to it.
You manage a lot of the digital side of things. How do you manage making sure that digital is still speaking to your bricks and mortar, your stores themselves? Because it's very easy for digital to race ahead and stores get left behind with what you're doing.
Yeah, it is very easy. And I would say that's one of the things that we're working to catch up right now. And you know, again, we talk about the future and getting ready for the future. For us, digital took off. Our app and app use took off much greater. And at the same time, third-party delivery took off much faster than we thought it would. So in some ways, we are chasing that a bit. But one of the ways is how we work. So we have made a shift, and it's much of what we talk about, or we've heard people talk about today, and that is really starting to work cross-departmentally and not working in our silos. And so right now, the team that I'm on is a relatively new form team that is restaurant design, our IT or DTT teams, and service and hospitality. And so it's been really unique to work through those three teams together to solve and stay connected, and I think that's going to help us to stay connected and not have a miss or a gap in the future.
We're seeing more and more cashless payments. I mean, when we were people on the food tour, we were down in the food market, and it was nobody wants cash. In somewhere like yourselves, you think it's going to creep in? I know some of your partners are already doing it, but is it going to affect you in a big way from a store?
I can't speak to what is going on with what's in the plans for Amazon and Whole Foods in terms of cashless transactions. From a personal experience, you know, like let's just say self-checkouts, for example, is something that people really love. Sometimes I want to have someone check out, like when I'm at Target, or I want to do it myself, right? Because I know exactly how to do it the fastest way. But sometimes if I'm having a lazy day, I want to actually talk to someone, right? And so I think the cashless thing is going to continue to happen. There is legislation that's been passed in San Francisco where you have to be able to accept cash. And I think that is going to change. I think that will continue to happen, right? I think it's happening in Philadelphia as well. So you can't have a cashless store. You have to be able to have cash and pay to have that option. So I think the efficiency is great. People want to talk to people too. And I think there's a balance between, like we were talking about, like what are the touch points of where you want to talk to a team member and where's the efficiency? Like you just want to go in and out and have your blinders on. So, and I think legislation will actually play a big part in that.
Cashless is really tricky too, because you also have the other side of it that, are you sending messages that, there's so many, and going back to the McDonald's experience here, something like 60% of the McDonald's clientele doesn't have a debit card or a bank card, so they're using cash all the time. So are you saying, hey, we're this exclusive brand, and we're not a democratic brand anymore, which for Blaze is pretty important because we do see ourselves as, we've got high quality under a certain price point. So I think the legislation is certainly a part of it. I think Shake Shack got kind of shut down, so to speak, for that. But it's also, what are the social implications of saying you can only have a cashless experience? And, there's ways of getting around that. You could always still have a standard POS with a cash drawer, maybe in a less prominent space. So, we're looking at things like that. But it's tough to... It's hard, I think it just comes back to listening to what customers want and what they're doing, respond to it, yet still create an environment where you're not alienating a good portion of the population who has money to spend, even if it's not on a debit card.
Yeah, I was going to say, we still have enough customers that come to us to pay with cash that we are still focused on it. And so that is one of the things when you think about honoring that customer, and not alienating them. And as we create these techno kind of or technology-based experiences, making sure that it isn't something that they have to step out of line and go pay with their cash and then get back in line, that it's actually seamless and it's integrated into that experience. So
it's slowly
still focused on
transitioning over, isn't it? I mean, I don't think I've pulled my card out once to pay for it. It's all on your phone. You go through on the train on your phone, and then you check into your hotel, and my hotel key's on my phone. So we just need to add more charging points. That would probably help.
Well, but I think that's going to come with time. I mean, these discussions we're having now, 10 years from now, we're not going to be having. So, I keep talking about the golden arches here, but it was a great, we had a great crystal ball for what lay ahead because we'd been doing kiosks for 10 years in Europe, where the kiosk usage rate is like 93% there. Same thing. People don't have cash, they're not pulling their euros out or pounds if you're in Britain or whatever. But it took a while. It took 10 years to get there. It wasn't like they were at 93% initially. So I think we'll get there. It's just, that's a long shift. So.
Well, we talked a little bit about ghost kitchens before as well, and obviously they're rising, and then we had the talk earlier about the guys being able to reach into other areas. Are they something that's right for yourself, for Blaze?
I don't know that a ghost kitchen would be. I'd say a dark kitchen for us, and the distinction, of course, being, could we have a Blaze-specific commissary outpost that's delivery only or carry-out only? Yeah, I don't think anything is off the table right now. I mean, there's certainly trade areas where it doesn't make sense to offer a dine-in experience, or it doesn't make sense to have a drive lane or a pickup lane or curbside or anything like that. I don't think it's crazy to plan for or investigate carry-out only or third-party pickup only or things like that, because there really isn't a one-size-fits-all strategy. I mean, we were talking about it earlier. There is no restaurant of the future. There's a real estate and a development approach to the restaurant experience of the future, and it's an important distinction, but one that we're focused on for sure.
Yeah, is it something that Chick-Fil-A would ever consider as they grow?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's something that we're going to have to figure out. So number of transactions, number of cars. So if you've been close to a Chick-fil-A around lunchtime and you've seen the cars that wrap all the way around, and then you think about the fact that now there's more people who can access it through third party, and there's more people that maybe it's easier to get to because now I can use my app. It's something that's getting added to our sites. And so we're going to have to figure out what does that portfolio of experiences look like, and it may be that pulling some of that business out and putting it someplace else is actually best to create the best overall experience for a freestanding restaurant.
That's interesting. And with just Whole Foods, with your food and beverage offer, how have you tried to stay ahead of how the market's changing, how people are using it?
Technology?
Yeah, a bit of technology and also the product itself. So are you seeing a growth in salads or the to-go boxes and those kind of elements?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this week is Expo West, which is like the world's largest natural food expo happening, and it's in Anaheim, and I think all the big players pulled out because of our health crisis. And so, that's where a lot of ideas get exchanged, right? And so, we're seeing a lot of growth in salads, of course, healthy eating. Our salad bars are outstanding. They will always be a key differentiator between us and any competitor, and restaurants too. I would love to go to a restaurant that is, quickly in and out and get a great salad, and that's not always possible. I think there's some trends that are happening, of course, around the CBD realm that Whole Foods is just starting to get into. And then, plant-based everything. Like oat milk is huge. A lot of times we see Whole Foods sort of initiating these sort of healthy alternatives, and then they get picked up by bigger producers, restaurants, et cetera.
That's really interesting. I'm going to throw out so many questions. Is there anyone got any questions that they would like to ask this amazing panel that we've got here? Yes, sir.
Julianne, there's an obvious cannabis reference.
Unintentional, but yes, there is. Yes, so that's what the founders claim. They said, we didn't know that was a euphemism for smoking up. I believe them. I choose to believe them. But that's the official story. We also don't make great efforts to squash that if anybody wants to imply.
Talk about Instagrammable moment.
Right. We don't have an April 20th promotion yet. We do have a Pi Day promotion coming up, by the way.
Made my question irrelevant because I'm going to ask you what you did to sort of forward that.
Well, we haven't. We just haven't. People have jumped to their own conclusions like you have, and we said no.
Yeah, free marketing's good marketing.
Right, no, we would never put that out there.
You should have a 420.
You should have it. Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, in our Haight Street store, we do our coffee bakery department is called the Wake and Bake. So, that's
That's fabulous.
that's curated to the Bay Area. But yeah, sorry, got off tangent.
Is anybody else with anything they'd like to ask the team? Yes, let it from.
So on the Chick-Fil-A app, when you're a Red member, you get offered to go tour the home office. I was wondering how many people actually take you up on that? And does it actually show a return to having guests come more?
I don't actually know the answer to that exactly, but what I can tell you is that our tours are hugely popular if you come to Atlanta, and there are groups that are coming through the office constantly. Yeah, there's a giant billboard out in the courtyard. You can take your picture.
Wow.
The billboard, do everything. So I can give you, like, it's really fun. I can tell you that a lot of people come to the home office. Yeah.
Anybody else? Well, brilliant. Thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Thank
Please
you.
give this amazing team a round of applause.
Thank you.